Welcome to 4 Quarter Lives, a podcast exploring the profound impact of longer lives and careers on everything: countries, companies, couples, and careers. I'm Aviva Wittenberg-Cox, and on this week's 4 Quarter Lives, I talk with Nick Viner, founder and co-CEO of Circle Square, a London-based community of purposeful Q3ers. Nick, whose first career was in management consulting, has built an accessible community of highly engaged and gender-balanced people. He offers a vibrant event calendar, a carefully filtered set of trusted service partners, and an individualized next chapter accompaniment for those who want it. Circle Square is now 5 years old, and Nick shares with us what he's learned, how he's grown, and what his own next stage plans are. So welcome, Nick Viner, to 4 Quarter Lives. Delighted to have you on.
Oh, thank you, Aviva. It's great to be here and to have this opportunity to have a chat with you.
Now, you created Circle Square, a community just over 5 years ago now. I think you just celebrated that anniversary with a wonderful motto I really love: celebrate the now, the new, and the next. So maybe we'll start with that. Let's start with the slogan, how you chose it.
Yeah, we believe that the years after the age of 50 are really a time to celebrate, and we want to encourage positive midlife. So we think it's important that it's a time to take advantage of everything that's happened in the years before, to harness the wisdom and the experience that we've accumulated through long lives well lived. So our messaging tends to be optimistic. We're embracing the future. We want to be energizing. We want to be confident in the future. You know, we believe that by this time in life, we've gained some perspective, maybe some clarity, an understanding of who we are and what's important to each of us. And maybe we worry a little bit less and we're more in control of what are hopefully exciting futures. And, you know, we see in this space, there's so much written about the negative consequences of aging, about being left behind or just waiting to die. And we wanted to come up with a different narrative. When it's a stage of life, we have more freedom to choose what we do. We're no longer in the throes of bringing up children or building a career, but still with the mental capacity and the energy to do things and to contribute to society, eventually to give back. And, you know, our oldest active member just celebrated his 94th birthday. He comes on walks, he volunteers in his local hospital. And as an accomplished woodworker, he's in the middle of building an elaborate scale model of his favorite local building. So he's a great example, a great inspiration to us.
Fantastic. And it sounds like a perfect definition of what I call Q3. So give me a sense of why then and how you chose to start Circle Square. What made you come to this idea of starting this community? What was your thinking and your own place in life when you did that?
Well, I had worked for many years in business. I studied law but never practiced. I took an MBA. I spent a significant part of my career at a company called Boston Consulting Group. And I really loved the partnership, the values of the organization, as well as the work we were doing. So very strong on professionalism, on client service. And then I was invited to set up a community and cultural center for the Jewish community. And I wasn't quite in Q3. It was a little bit before. And it was a very big shift, but it was about something that seemed to me extremely important. And having been an advisor for the first 25 or so years of my career, I wanted to be a principal. I wanted to do something where the impact was more concrete. And indeed, we built a building, which is now nearly 11 years old and turned out to be very successful. But I can see what we delivered. I can see the organization. I can see the building. And so this idea of having impact and creating something there, it was about building a community, was something that became, I think, really important to me. And subsequent to that, I got into much more of a portfolio career with quite a lot of work for not-for-profits in the arts and education space, as well as some commercial activity, and came together with my partner to found Circle Square because we felt, we were getting into that sort of age group, and we felt that it was an area where there was a real gap for people who had a lot to give and somehow were being ignored. So that was a little bit the genesis of Circle Square. And we played around with lots of different models, but we sort of, worked our way through to what we're currently doing.
So explain the name first. Why Circle Square, which is an evocative name? What does it mean? Is there a symbolism to the shapes?
Well, the sort of Vitruvian man, of course, is a circle is sort of one idea, but the idea of a circle and a square was a circle is another form of a group coming together, of a community, that people are all part of a circle. And we also had the notion that we sort of, our lives, we circle every year, the earth circles the sun, there's a sort of circularity to, and then sort of coming back round to life. But we wanted to combine that with the notion of a square, which I think for us is very much a town square, or a forum, a place where people meet, where things happen and where encounters take place, where you can get stimulation. So that was a little bit the idea. And of course, I mean, maybe it's a little bit cliche, but the notion of squaring the circle or trying to do the impossible was another element of what we were trying to do.
Very nice. I like that combination of the individual and the community in a single set of shapes. That's very nice. And it's very interesting that there was such a slew of communities that began around this Q3 notion, around a little bit about the same time. So how would you say you differ or share some of the other groups that have emerged? I'm thinking of Noon, which is obviously for women, Restless, 55 to Redefine. There are a number now in the UK. The UK has been in the lead on this.
And sort of interestingly, when we started, the one that we had seen in the US was the AARP, which was the Association of Retired, I think, Professionals.
Retired people, yeah. No, it's everybody. Everybody over 50 is part of AARP.
Exactly. And I think that from what I know of these other organizations, there may well be some overlap at the margins, but I think we're distinctive in a number of ways. First of all, we're a membership organization and members pay to join. It means that people are making a financial commitment to be part of Circle Square. So there's a level of engagement that is different from simply signing up to a newsletter or, being on a mailing list. So I think that's one very important thing, and we felt very strongly about that when we started. Secondly, our members really shape what we do. So most of our events and activities are driven by members themselves, sharing their experiences and their expertise, telling their stories. And I suppose thirdly, while we have many members who are still working, we're essentially sort of post-formal careers. So we are not about age-friendly employment. We're not a lobby group, though we have lots of views and opinions and strong ideas about how things might change for the better. So I think in some of those ways, we are different. And we combine this idea of building a community which has a social element to it, but also helping people to transition from their formal careers into new chapters with hopefully some excitement and ease. And this idea of really trying to create a sense of purpose for people in that group, trying to, in the end, make a contribution in ways that maybe are in addition to what they're currently doing.
Yeah, and that is quite different, right? And I think it's very interesting that you're not either offering yourselves as a platform to be marketed to this age group, but much more of this kind of membership driven, which I find interesting. And you have some really lovely and interesting people. I was drifting through some of your member profiles. Can you share a few typical profiles or ones who inspire you perhaps? And do you segment them in any way?
At the moment, we don't, although we have two strands, which maybe we'll touch on, which is people who are working on the sort of the corporate side, planning our next chapter and our core membership. But our members come from a very wide range of backgrounds and experiences, entrepreneurs and business people, academics and medical professionals, lawyers, accountants, people from property, the arts, technology. And yes, there is no typical profile, because one of the things that we learn is everyone has a really rich and multi-layered story. But, some examples of people we featured in recent member newsletters, Naomi, who trained in printed textile design, then worked in sales and marketing in the textile industry. And then when COVID struck, decided that it was important to make a difference and started collecting goods locally for a food bank. And she then set up something called Food Bank Aid, which has become a very successful charity, which delivers now goods to over 33 food banks in London and across the home counties, reaching about 20,000 people. So one example of someone who is an interesting background, someone very different, John, who's a senior corporate and commercial lawyer at London's leading music and entertainment law firm, still working, but spending more time on his various hobbies, which he describes as cycling, as gardening, as music, his local football team, which I won't mention because some people will get very upset. And he's building up a large collection of Winston Churchill memorabilia. So very, very different focus. And then Isabel, who is as wonderful, is she started out as an editor of magazines and a journalist and ran an art gallery. And then she retrained as a counselor and drama therapist. She was working with older people on reminiscence projects. And then she became a Blue Badge guide. And in fact, she leads tours for us, walking tours. And in parallel, she took a doctorate in philosophy and has been publishing books on left-wing theatre and on female pioneers. So very, very different mix of people. So leave you with those examples.
Wonderful. I must admit, they're a very inspiring bunch. So you have 3 different services or streams that you offer. Give us a little overview. That's membership, trusted partners, and planning next chapters. But maybe you could develop each of those a bit more.
Membership essentially gives you access to our community, which we believe is a pretty vibrant and interesting community, and also to the RICH
And
program.
how big is it today, the community? We're talking how many people approximately?
We've got in the region of 400 members currently in our community. So it gives you access to the community and also to the RICH program of events and to our clubs. So the sort of activities and events we put on, recent ones included a symposium on international law called Can International Law Still Bite, with an eminent professor of law, 2 KCs, and a practitioner working with the ICJ. We had a concert with a fabulous young cellist in a member's home. We had a panel of 6 inspiring women talking about empowerment in midlife. And then earlier in the year, actually very nice, an exposition of the work of 2 of our members who make facsimile editions of illuminated manuscripts, which they've been doing for over 40 years. Absolutely spectacular copies of old Bibles and the Quran and other texts. So a bunch of things like that. Some of our activities are social, some have more intellectual sort of content and depth. And then we have a bunch of clubs where smaller groups of members come together to do something of particular interest. So we have a book club, a gardening club, an art club, an investment club. And they sort of really follow a slightly different sort of tempo. So that's sort of one strand. But as a member also, you have access to our pool of trusted partners. And our trusted partners are a small number of carefully selected providers of services that offer things to our members that are really relevant at this time of life and that can be material. So it can range from financial planning to IT in the home to insurance.
I love that one, IT in the home. That's
it's great because
I bet you that's a popular one.
It's very, and when your kids or in some cases your grandchildren are not available to help you to make the television work, on the broadband, whatever it may be. Anyway, so that's very valuable. The partners are very carefully selected. For us, what is really important is that they provide a high level of service and responsiveness and a respect for and understanding of this group of people. And so they need to see that they can really work with our membership. And of course, our members, and you mentioned other organizations that do this, our members are very valuable for these companies because with the right relationship, they tend to be very loyal. We like a good deal. We don't want to be ripped off. But actually more important is this sense of trust. And if you have a good recommendation, then you tend to follow it. And then people from our partners actually meet our members. They help them to solve problems. They can build strong relationships. So they're very much within the group. And then the third pillar of our activity, which we call planning your next chapter, is about providing bespoke and practical advice and coaching support to people, particularly executives, partners of professional services firms, people coming to the end of their formal career. It's helping them to go through some kind of, transition in their professional lives and prepare for the future. So it's a sort of structured program that helps people look ahead.
We'll come back to that a little bit more detail because we're very interested in this podcast on all things midlife accompaniment and transition. So we'll revisit that in a bit more depth. But maybe before we go more into that, I'd love to know a little bit more about you, Nick. I think this is a wonderful initiative. I think there's a real culture and sense of values around this community that I find very compelling. Can you share a bit more? You've given us a hint of your professional background, but what's your own background and how did you feel coming into Q3 and what were your own choices and transitions?
Very interesting. Well, one of the things that sort of took me into business was, as a child, we had a family business in a city called Sheffield. And from, I think, the age of 7, I would go to initially earn pocket money and then a little bit more go and work in the factory. And I had always thought that I would be the 4th generation taking over this business. But for all sorts of reasons, it was not to be, which is why I had to do a degree and become a consultant and so on. But this idea of something which it was a business that at the time there were nearly 1,000 people that worked there. This idea of being part of a wider community, and I suppose it was quite paternalistic at the time, but I love this idea of doing something that would help others, that would have an impact for others. And as I went through my business career and thought about the shift, the idea of, and maybe we'll touch on this in a moment, the idea of legacy. What is your contribution? What might you be remembered for? What might you leave behind? How can you make a difference? Became more important for me. And once I worked in creating the community and cultural centre, it was very, very hard to go back to the pure pursuit of mammon. It was, my emphasis had changed, and I realised actually there's a whole set of things that, I had skills that I could use in other ways that would be sort of create a lot of stimulation, but also create a lot of value for others. So as we thought about, Circle Square, again, it was really about the notion of community is very, very important, and bringing people together who obviously share some values, have some like-minded features, but also as you bring a group together, you have lots of different ideas. And I think this flow of ideas and creativity is very important to me. And ultimately trying to contribute to society in some way. So how do we do that? Well, I suppose to the extent that we know as you age to have healthy, long lives, being physically and mentally active and having social engagement is hugely important. So all of those things we are doing. And when we started, one notion was that if we can really create something for older people, they will spend less time at the doctors, or there's lesser demands on social care or on the health service and so on. But the reality is, as people get stimulated, they can really, do interesting things. So that was sort of one piece of it. But also we're trying to think more broadly, what can we as a group do? So for instance, a few months ago, we launched what we call Circle Square Green, which is obviously all about the environment and sustainability. And now when a new member joins or a member refers someone, we plant a tree. So, just sort of small steps. And we have just partnered with a not-for-profit organization in solar energy, where we're putting solar panels on schools. They put solar panels on community building, and the community building gets cheaper energy. You make an investment, you can get a modest return, or you can gift the investment back to the organization. But the idea is to make a contribution in the local community. So again, through members' different initiatives, we're trying to find ways that we can make a difference in a small way, and hopefully that will snowball. So those are some of the elements that, for me, Circle Square satisfies.
So community and legacy, those are all very powerful words at this stage. And I'm curious how building this particular organization has nourished your own Q3 shift or evolution. Was it a support for you? Did you learn something from it that helped your own transitions? I
think that really getting to meet very different new people and realizing that everybody has a fascinating story to tell. And so making new friends, that's been one dimension. And I think one of the things we found in Circle Square, people say, are you a dating organization? Absolutely, we're not. But one of the things we found is that people at a certain age find it very hard to make new friends. You make friends in school, in university, in your first job. If you have kids, then you make friends with the parents of your children's friends. But there's a point when it becomes hard and your networks are set. So that's been one of the, I think, really nice sort of side effects. So meeting new people and understanding that's been great for me. I suppose this is the first time in this way that I've been involved in a real startup, and learning that it's quite challenging and you have to do everything. And most of the things you have to do, you're not very good at, but you do them anyway and hopefully improve at some. So that's been, I think, stimulating and challenging. And then I suppose really exploring this whole space, because we think there's so much potential to do things in this area. And as you say, there's lots of activity, there's lots of research, but there's also a lot of people doing things. So I think seeing how we can have an impact and build a presence is something that's been, I think, both stimulating and challenging. Yep.
So new friends and entrepreneurship, I think that's a nice pivot at our ages and stages. So I'm curious, after 5 years, how you'd summarize or stand back and think of, so what do Q3ers want? Is there a way to summarize it? Is it extraordinarily diverse? Or can you pull out a few lessons from these 5 years?
I think that I wouldn't underestimate the importance of, for most people, of social interaction, of fulfilling social interaction. Some people are very solitary, but actually many people really, really look for that. And interestingly, in our Planning Your Next Chapter work, one of the things that's been quite striking is we do work with men and women. And whilst I hate to generalize about sort of differences between men and women,
please do. That's one of our favorite themes.
In that space, one of the things that we find is women seem to be, I was going to say, less confident or probably less overconfident than men are in their ability to sort of waltz into something. Men are much more anxious about friendship. That women tend to have, particularly women, again, we're looking at people who have had very successful professional lives up until the age of 60 or 65 or whatever, women tend to have retained, in general, more friends and also have a little bit more resilience, particularly those who've taken time out to have children and then have had to come back into the workplace and so on. One of the things that's quite striking is how many men say, I didn't really have any or very few close friends when I stopped work. My work was very much the center of my social life to the extent that it existed. So that's been, I think, one of the things. And the other thing we see is people join us who had long-standing partnerships. A spouse may have died, may be ill. So this idea of companionship is, I think, hugely important. They say it's not dating because people aren't necessarily looking for a life partner. They're looking for someone to go for a walk with, to go to an exhibition with, to spend time with, to share ideas with, and friendship blossom. So that's sort of one dimension.
I'm sure you've had at least a couple or two blossom too.
I think we have.
We aren't promising, but come in.
And then we've mentioned community a lot, but I think people like to contribute. We're sometimes a bit diffident when we say to someone, or we think about, should we ask somebody to do something? People love being asked to do things. They love being asked to share. They love being asked to talk about what they know about or their expertise. They love to lead something. So that is very nice, that actually the importance of, particularly again, if you've been working and you're no longer working in the same way, your identity is so tied up in your role. And people ask who you are, what you do. And you say, well, and then you say, well, I used to be, and you can't. You've got to find that new sense of purpose. So this idea of contributing and being part of something where people are coming to hear you or you're engaging with other people, I think that's something that's very, very important. And interestingly also, obviously it's a stage where many of our members have children, they have grandchildren, they're thinking about the future, and they're thinking about the next generation and how to bring the next generation along. Have they got sometimes the right financial support? What are the values? How can I bring that out and engage with them? So that's again something that is something of a focus without being in any way morbid, but it's a time to sort of step back and reflect a little bit on life, but also to explore new things. So, we have people getting involved in creative writing. Actually, a lot of people who want to write their memoir. Obviously, some are going to be better than others, but it's very nice because it's
a huge part of this phase. Digesting where you've been. It's a really wonderful exercise.
Absolutely.
So tell me a bit more now about this rather formal next chapter accompaniment you offer. It's one of your 3 pillars. Can you just walk me through the steps and the process? I know that they're quite distinct. And perhaps share some of the anecdotes or experiences, discoveries, and insights that people have had going through it.
So it's called Planning Your Next Chapter because we believe life is in chapters, and we try to avoid using the word retirement because people are going on to new things, but it's helping people to forge a new sense of purpose and identity after what may have been a very all-encompassing role, or about just finding new avenues and meaningful ways to fill your time. So it's very much taking a holistic view of the future rather than, what's my next job going to be? It's not that at all.
What board can I sit on?
Exactly. Although that may be one of the things that you do, but there are 4 pillars to the program, starting with setting your direction. And we have something which we call Pathfinder, which is really about exploring what is it that you can be passionate about? What are those things that can really make you want to, when you wake up in the morning, get out of bed with energy? So it's starting with that. What is really important to me and how can I harness that in the future? And for many people, it will be innate, but it may have been, layered over and over through, many, many years of work and life. And it's how you bring that out. And once that has been, I suppose, teased out, articulated a little bit, then we go into a process which, and we call it sort of building a roadmap, but it's really about helping to think about practical things that you can do to bring out what is most important to you. So it's a process of really exploring more concrete ideas. It might be getting involved in some board work. It might be pursuing some new areas of interest. It might be doing something completely different. So the roadmap is about, you go down a sort of process to get a little bit more concrete. And through that process as well, you may get some support with, we had someone a lawyer who wanted to move into healthcare, and he'd worked on the corporate side. He needed help with his application because he saw an opportunity to sit on a hospital trust. How do I apply for this? How do I describe myself? Well, my CV looks nothing like a CV that I would need for that. And then, surprisingly, I better have some help with interviews because the last time I did an interview was 30 years ago. So there's a sort of process you go through. And then as it becomes clearer what it is that you want to do, we draw on what we call mentors, but they're essentially people in our network, peers, who have done a whole range of different things and who may well have very precise experience of doing or not doing what it is that you want to do. So we had, for example, he was a professional who had, with a friend, decided to go into business and import antiques from Vietnam. And his experience was in insurance. So he knew nothing about this, but he thought it was a good idea. And we put him in touch with two of our members, one who worked with small businesses to help them to develop business plans. And that was already a good start because he hadn't really thought about the revenue model and how the business would be structured. And then we put him in contact with a serious collector of art and antiques, who just started to talk to him and ask him a few questions, which is, well, how do you know if this something is real or is fake? How are you going to get things from your local market to the UK? What licenses do you need? Where are you going to sell it? What about insurance? How's it all going to work? How are you going to avoid getting ripped off? Anyway, they had a very good conversation. And later, the guy came back and said, well, this was fantastic. I decided not to do this at all. I'm going to be doing it. I bought a couple of properties that I'm going to develop. I'm going to have a little Airbnb business. I'm not going to do that. But this was fantastic because I scratched the itch. I avoided what it would have been a disaster, but it was fantastic to do that. So that was an example of where one of the mentors.
Wonderful. Yeah. At least check through some dreams. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the last piece is people become part of Circle Square and they can have access to the services. So those are the elements of the program. And we take people through over a period of, it's very much an individually tailored program, over a period of, it can be from 3 months to 18 months. It's very much the pace and the arc depends on the individual. And it can be, very revealing. I think we spoke before about someone who was an eminent doctor and a teacher of doctors, who was also a very good pianist and lacked a lot of confidence in what he was going to do next. And through this process, he was describing himself as an amateur pianist. And the person who was talking to him through this, and particularly was in the Pathfinder work, said, well, did you call yourself an amateur doctor? And he said, of course I didn't. What are you talking about? He said, well, you're pretty good as a pianist. Why are you calling yourself an amateur pianist? Maybe there's a whole mindset shift that allows you to give yourself permission to be a professional pianist. And he's been doing some recording and he's been doing some concerts. It was just about helping people to think about things in a slightly different way.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how, I think the more masterful you've been in your first version, the more hard on yourself you are as you transition.
Without doubt.
A bit less masterful in your second. You can self-judge until you don't do anything at all. So
exactly. I think it's really important to sort of go a little bit with the flow, which isn't always easy when everything you've done has been somehow controlled and managed. You're completely right.
Yeah. No, it sounds like a wonderful, you've created almost a several hundred strong peer support network that gets people collectively through this transition moment. Sounds wonderful. And I also want to pick up on something you already mentioned. You've built a refreshingly gender balanced community. It's quite unusual. A lot of the organizations and a lot of the thinking and writing in this space is kind of gendered, very much for women, very much for men. I'm curious why you think you've been able to balance and any...
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we wanted men and women to be part of it. We didn't think there was any difference in the need or in the nature of what we were doing. We didn't consciously do anything to aim at men and women, but, we encourage people to join with their partner or spouse if they have one. So we have a mix of household and individual members, and it costs the same if you're an individual or a household. So sometimes individuals complain, but the households get the benefit. And sometimes one person in a couple is more engaged, brings their partner along.
Very wise. And that's a very accelerated way to gender balance.
Yeah. And our events are completely, it's not aimed at one gender versus another. It's very much neutral. And we're very conscious of trying to do things that you would feel comfortable as a single person coming or as a couple. And it's a welcoming group of people. So I think hopefully people who don't know members, as they start to engage, they get to know them. Yes, I think it's turned out in that respect, it's turned out quite nicely for now. I think, again, the flow of people coming in is still pretty much a pretty good mix of men and women.
Yep. So start with partners. I think that's a wonderful idea and recommendation for many initiatives in this space. So let's end perhaps with your next steps. Where might you go next? What's your thinking? Is a lot of what you're doing in your current membership London or UK based? Any ideas of expansion abroad? And where do you think you'll be a decade hence?
Where would you like to be? We are sort of based mainly in London and the home counties, though we do have some members abroad and who spent time abroad. And actually during COVID, which was quite early on in our evolution, we had a whole program that was online. So we got a lot of people from outside, but now we are really focusing on in-person interaction, which I think most people prefer and value more. So our idea has always been to, once we reached a certain critical mass, and we're getting to that stage now, is to try to create chapters in other locations. It could be in other cities in the UK, but also abroad. So we want to be able to build sort of local closeness and local activity, but allow people when they're traveling, and many of our members, someone goes to New York or to Zurich or to Paris, and that we think it's very replicable. And the model that we've seen that has, I think, been around for a while as well is the YPO, the Young Presidents Organization, which has done this well. So we would like to replicate our membership in that way. And I think in parallel, we want to expand our corporate work across borders. So a lot of the companies that we work for, whose executives and partners we look after, they're in more than one jurisdiction. Some of them are global, many of them are international. And again, we think that the nature of what we're doing is actually very transferable, and we would like to be able to do that, which again has some elements that are kind of centrally the same, but then have local variations. So as we're helping people practically with, they want to think about financial planning, what does it mean as a pensioner? Well, clearly it's very, very different in Germany from the UK, from Australia. What are the opportunities? What are the networks that exist and so on to help me in this next phase? So that would be, I think, the second piece of our aspiration. So let's see, in 10 years' time, let's hope that you'll be seeing us around
the world. Any next cities on the hit list as first options that seem?
Actually, we think New York we've got certain connections in New York, and we think there are a lot of similarities in the environment. So that's, I think, one of our thoughts. But let's see.
Cool. Okay, I will check back soon. And for listeners who can join, who are in London or maybe in New York, if you're listening, how much does it cost? How can they join? Now they know they can bring their partner in along with them for the same price.
They can bring their partner if you live in the same location, right? Because it's household. No, so anyone over 50 can join us.
Yep.
Membership currently costs just £360 a year.
Yep.
And if someone is interested in planning your next chapter, it's a bespoke program that's subject to a conversation about what the needs are and how that would work. And there's lots of information on our website, which allows you can join on the website. It's very easy, and you can explore and indeed engage in a dialogue if you want to learn.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick. And just for full disclosure, I've just joined because I thought it was a very compelling community, and it's not that expensive.
We'd like to have, and looking forward to welcoming you at one of our events very soon, Aviva.
With great pleasure. Now, I always end these podcasts with a question of how you might summarize or metaphorize each of your own 4 quarters in 25-year chunks from 0 to 100, looking past and future. What, Nick, would be your 4-quarter metaphor?
Wow. I don't know. I mean, I was thinking about this, and I don't know how well this is metaphorized, as you say, but clearly quarter 1 was very much about education and childhood and formation and travel, actually, including living in a garret in Paris for several months, which was quite formative. And quarter 2 was about family. It was about marriage and children and building, I suppose, focusing on a career and building. And as I mentioned, there was probably transition a little bit earlier than normal, but that was very important because that really then opened up Q3, which I think has been about trying to give back. It's been about making new friends. It's about rethinking priorities. It's been about grandchildren as well. And it's about starting to think about legacy. And the next quarter, well, obviously we start with the hope that there'll be enough to be healthy, so health. But I think it's a time to both be more reflective, but maybe to try some new pursuits. And maybe there's some more learning in that quarter. Maybe there's some great-grandchildren. Who knows? I think that's not impossible. And then I think it's about making that legacy happen. So going from thinking about it to really, I suppose, putting it into place. I suppose that's how I would describe it.
Very nice. No, absolutely. Wonderful. But I'm also very interested that when you were describing the foundations of Circle Squared, you actually talked that how important community was in Q1 and how important it is in Q3, so that you've actually got these bookmarks and repetitions that I find myself very, very interesting. But thank you for sharing your 4 quarters with us, Nick, and all good luck with Circle Squared and the vision for the next decade. May we see you soon everywhere.
No, Aviva, thank you, and real pleasure to talk, and thank you so much for having me today.
I will see you somewhere between the circle and the square very shortly. Bye-bye.
Good. Thanks so much, Aviva.
For more thinking about the impact of our 4-quarter lives, you can read my column at Forbes and subscribe to my Elderberries newsletter on Substack. Let's design lives that aren't just longer, but better.